G'day. Okay, I'd like to talk a little bit about perception. Perception, how we perceive things. Perception is how we see something. It's a form of understanding how we see something. Perception. From perception, we get hindsight, insight, and foresight. Okay, the way we see something. Hindsight, looking back. Insight, looking within. Foresight, looking ahead. In essence. Okay, so we're going to use again geometry, geometrical thought harmonics, designs of thought. Perception is represented by a 7-pointed polygon, 7 sides, 7 equal angles, a heptagon. It's represented by a heptagon, 7 sides, 7 points. Okay, perception. Now, progressions of perception. If we take 2 of those heptagons, overlap them to form 14 points, one had 7 points, overlap them to form 14 points, it forms an interaction or experience-based perception. Interactive or experience-based perception. Perception of experience. Perception of experience. How we looking at our experiences. How we perceive our experiences. That's hindsight, looking back. How we perceive our experiences. Looking back at the past. To learn from the past. Once we know the outcome, then we can see what brought about that outcome through hindsight. Through hindsight, we can see how things came about. We can see what caused the result. In essence, it's understanding cause and effect. Understanding cause and effect. Hindsight. We look at what formed the result, an event, and what brought about that event. Through hindsight, we can do that easily because it's already happened. So we can see what caused it. What caused that to happen? Cause and effect. Okay. Then we have insight. Insight, still a product of perception. 7-pointed polygon, heptagon, but has 3 of those heptagons overlapping to form 21 points. Now, when it forms 21 points, as 14 points, there are no other traits within that structure. It's just heptagons. There's no equilateral triangles, no squares, nothing like that. It's purely perceptive, but perceptive of experience, of what has been experienced. But with the 21 points, it's a product of equilateral triangles, 7 of them. 7 threes are 21. Equilateral triangle represents creative thought or imagination. Okay, so it's creative perception or perception of creativity. How we perceive what has been created. How we perceive. what has been created. Perception of creativity. Insight. Looking within. Looking at how something was created. How something was created, what it's made up of. Examining what something is made up of. Looking within. The structure of that creation. Perception of creation. Insight. Then we have foresight. Now, foresight. Foresight is actually a progression of hindsight. It's a product of hindsight. Foresight, it actually has 4 heptagons overlapping to form 28 points. That becomes a product of 7 squares of intellect. Intellect is receptive and constructive, takes on board and builds upon concepts. Perceptive intelligence, intelligent perception. Intellect takes on board and builds upon concepts. It's receptive and constructive, takes on board and builds upon what has been perceived. Now, because 28 points is twice 14 points, 14 and 14 makes 28, it's a product of hindsight. Perceptive intelligence, what is taken on board and built upon, takes on board and builds upon experiences. Receptive to what has happened in the past, product of hindsight. So using hindsight, we can predict what might happen in the future when we have an understanding of what caused an event in the past. Through hindsight, we can predict generally, not necessarily accurately, what might happen. Emphasis on might. What could happen? A possible scenario in the future from what we have learned from the past. Okay, hindsight, insight, and foresight. Okay, now, in the last video I spoke about feeling, an expression of emotional intelligence. Intellect takes on board and builds upon concepts. It's receptive and constructive. Feeling is an expression of what has been suggestively taken on board and built upon. It's a product of emotional intelligence, an expression of emotional intelligence. Emotion is suggestive. Emotion is suggestive. All hypotheses are suggestions. They're formed by emotion. So feeling is an expression of what has been suggestively taken on board and built upon. Now, if we use hindsight as the base of feeling, hindsight-based feeling, okay, has an equator of hindsight, 14-point design, a tetradecagon, tetra meaning 4, decagon 10, 4 plus 10. A tetradecagon, emotional plane, an equator of hindsight. Then we have 7 emotional squares of intellect, forming an apex at the top, an apex at the bottom, with that tetradecagon as the equator, the emotional plane. suggestive. Okay, so we have feeling suggested by hindsight. Feeling suggested by hindsight. Hindsight-based feeling. Now, in the language of mind, relating all of that to our consciousness, the mind itself, what would that represent? Hindsight-based feeling. An expression of what has been suggestively taken on board and built upon through hindsight. What has been suggestively taken on board and built upon through hindsight. Hindsight-based feeling. Feeling suggests behaviour. So, hindsight-based feeling suggests hindsight-based behaviour. Hindsight-based behaviour. Looking back. Retrospective. Looking back. In retrospect. So that, I've just said what it is. Retrospection. Hindsight-based feeling is retrospection. Looking back. Retrospection. An expression of what has been suggestively taken on board and built upon through hindsight. Retrospection. Okay. Now, that was an expression of emotional intelligence. If we form an agreement of emotional intelligence, polarized by hindsight, it's a polarized structure. Top and bottom facets are the tetradecagon of hindsight, 14 points, formed by 7 emotional squares of intellect, but they don't form apexes, they're not focused. It forms an agreement. Each of those square emotional planes form, interact, overlap. The edges overlap this time, not the facets. Forms 7 diagonals of the 14-point design. 7 lines of thought. Those lines of thought are edges of the squares of emotional intelligence. So it becomes hindsight polarized, a hindsight polarized emotional intellect agreement. A hindsight polarized an emotional intellect agreement. An agreement of what has been suggestively taken on board and built upon through hindsight. It's an agreement of what has been suggestively taken on board and built upon through hindsight. Okay, hindsight-based feeling was retrospection. But hindsight polarized emotional intellect agreement forms probability. Probability. We have possibility, then we have probability. Probability is determined by circumstances and conditions. Something becomes probable if the circumstances and conditions allow for it. It becomes probable. Hindsight, looking back at the circumstances and conditions of what caused those circumstantial surroundings or conditions. Probability. Okay, probability. Hindsight polarized. Emotional logic. Now, all forms of logic, library of growing intelligent concepts as an acronym. A library categorizes, accumulates and categorizes. Memory. Logic is memory. Emotional memory. is emotional logic. So hindsight polarized emotional logic is the memory of what has been experienced from the past. Memory of what has been experienced from the past. Memory of hindsight. Probability. From that memory of hindsight, we can determine probability. What caused something in the past? What caused an event? What brought it about? From that understanding, like I said, we accumulate that memory of experience to determine probability, whether something might probably happen, determined by what already has happened, what caused it, probability. Okay, now we go to Foresight. No, well, we'll go to Insight. No, we won't. We'll go to Foresight first, actually, because Foresight is a product of hindsight. So Foresight-based feeling, you have the 28-point design of Foresight, which is, and hold on, I don't always remember these names. Okay, so it's an icosi chi octagon. An icosagon is 20 points. An octagon is 8 points. So 20 plus 8, 28. An icosi chi octagon, 28 points. Product of 7 squares of intellect, or 4 heptagons of perception. Okay, so we have the icosi chi octagon, emotional plane, the equator. Then we have 14 emotional intellect planes, forming or focused top and bottom to form an apex at the top and at the bottom. Foresight-based feeling, an expression of emotional intelligence, or an expression of what has been suggestively taken on board and built upon now from hindsight, helps us to predict, or helps us to have foresight. Foresight based upon hindsight. So it's a product of hindsight-based feeling, which was retrospection. So it's a product of retrospection. Foresight-based feeling is a product of retrospection. But intellect is receptive and constructive, takes on board and builds upon concepts. So it's a product of 7. If we take that icosi chi octagon emotional plane, the equator, 7 squares of intellect. Those squares become the bases of square-based pyramids of attitude, attitude directed upwards and directed downwards, double terminating pyramid, the octahedron of nature, attitudinal behavior. 7 of those octahedrons of nature, or attitudinal behavior, overlapping, interactive, and experience-based nature. Okay, so it is foresight-based attitudinal feeling. which suggests foresight-based attitudinal behaviour. Now, foresight-based feeling, premonition. Premonition is foresight-based feeling. It's also a product of retrospection, which was hindsight-based feeling. So it's a progression of hindsight-based feeling. Through hindsight, we can determine possible outcomes in the future by our understanding of what has happened in the past, or what caused the happenings of the past. We can predict. Premonition. We get a premonition based upon what we have learned through hindsight-based feeling, retrospection. We get premonitions, foresight-based. A premonition of what might come about, determined by what has already come about and what caused it. Feeling is an expression of emotional intelligence. It accumulates, forms memory. Okay, so we have premonition as foresight-based feeling. Then we have the emotional logic, foresight polarized emotional logic, foresight polarized emotional logic, foresight polarized emotional intellect agreements, a foresight polarized emotional intellect agreements, an agreement of what has been suggestively taken on board and built upon through hindsight that determines foresight. Foresight is a product of hindsight. Okay, so that foresight polarized emotional logic's memory. So it's memory of hindsight polarized emotional logic, probability, but a progression of probability. The progression of probability is extrapolation. We extrapolate from hindsight, we extrapolate, predict what could possibly come about in the future through extrapolation, using what is known to predict what is not known, but to predict what might come about. Extrapolation. This stuff fascinates me. Okay. So, if we go to insight, now insight's a bit different. All of those are products of heptagons of perception. They're all products of perception. Hindsight, perception of experience. Insight was creative perception, perception of creation. Foresight, perceptive intelligence, what has been accumulated through perception, taken on board and built upon to determine possible outcomes. Okay, so the insight was 21 points, 7 equilateral triangles of creative thought or imagination, overlapping, interactive, experiential, all experiential, 21 points. However, to create feeling, we must have an even number of points. A polygon equator with an even number of points. The 4, the 8, the 28, the 14, must have an equal-sided polygons. 21 points not equal-sided means one point doesn't have an opposite point, like the square, like the tetradecagon and the icosahedral octagon. They don't have opposite points. They don't form diagonals through the centre of that polygon. So the 21 points of insight, to form feeling, it must become a 42-point design. It must become a 42-point design. Two 28s. Two 21s. Two 21s, 42. 7 times 6 is 42. 7 hexagons of love. Unconditional acceptance forms programs, reflex responses, or impulses. But a center point hexagon forms awareness. It's a love-based sense agreement, a sensory impulse. Awareness, a sensory impulse. So we have 7 center point hexagons forming the 42 points. Now, if we go back to previous forms of feeling, we had awareness-based feeling. Center point hexagon was the equator, formed by 3 emotional squares of intellect, focused, forming apex at the top, apex at the bottom. Awareness-based feeling, suggesting awareness-based behaviour. Now, awareness-based behaviour is respect. Awareness is love-based. Love-based feeling is respect. Love-based behaviour is respect. So, that product of insight is a product of respect. Love-based behaviour, love-based feeling. But it's perceptive. It's a product of perception, perceptive awareness. Perceptive awareness. Okay. Now what does that form? Perceptive awareness. That's what it has to be to form feeling. To form an expression of emotional intelligence based upon program perception or perceptive awareness. Now, what would be another name for that perceptive awareness-based feeling? An expression of what has been suggestively taken on board and built upon through perceptive awareness. Product of respect, awareness-based behaviour. To tell you the truth, I haven't worked that one out yet. But it is a product of insight. It's also a product of awareness, product of perception. Okay, and that would have, again, emotional logic as well. 42-point polygon at the top pole, 42-point polygon at the bottom pole, formed by 21 emotional squares of intellect, forming an agreement of what has been suggestively taken on board and built upon through perceptive awareness. Now, inside itself yeah, it's looking within. It's seeing what something is made up of. What something is made up of. Perception of creation. Perception of what has been created. How it was created. That's more or less what that is. Insight is to perceive how something was created. Determines its purpose. What it does. Through insight. And like I said, the way I get this stuff still relies a lot on intuition. See, I work out all of the fundamentals. It's like an alphabet, creating words, sentences, documenting our thoughts, geometry, triangles, squares, hexagons, pentagons, all that stuff. It's like an alphabet. So you look at what something is made up of to determine what it might be, what its purpose might be, and the overall, by examining its fundamentals, its fundamental designs of thought, its traits, and the accumulation of those traits. So, that 42-point design, I said, made up of equal little triangles, heptagons of perception, hexagons of love, center point hexagons of awareness, determining what that might be, trying to give it a name, looking at the combination of those traits. It's creative, it's perceptive, and it's aware. It's aware. It's creative, it's perceptive, and it's aware. It's also programmed, reflex responsive, impulsive. Love is impulsive. Okay, so like I said, haven't worked that one out yet. Usually takes me a little bit of focusing on something, meditating on something, for the mind to start ticking, tick, 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 processing that information to come up with a label that best defines that particular design of thought. I will eventually come up with that. It's just that the main thing I was focused on here was perception, what perception is, what it manifests, hindsight, insight, and foresight. The rest of it, I added to it, the stuff that I presently understand, that can relate. Said retrospection, probability, premonition, extrapolation, insight, perception of creativity, how something was created, what its purpose might be. And I am sorry that I can't define properly that product, that insight-based feeling or insight-based emotional logic. But I will, when I come up with that, I will put it out and explain it to the best of my ability. But like I said, perception, how we see something, form of understanding of how we see something, gives us sight, hindsight, insight, foresight. We look back, we look within, and we look ahead. Perception is looking at something, how it is perceived. And how we perceive a lot of things can determine how we understand something. There's a form of understanding. How we see something, form of understanding. So, if the way we perceive something isn't really what it is, we can get sidetracked, diverted, go down the wrong rabbit hole. And then life can be perceived to be something that it's not. This reality, or how we have perceived this reality, how we have perceived ourselves by looking within, is very limited. A very limited perception. Lack of information, lack of understanding, lack of awareness. However, when I figure out that insight, the perceptive awareness might give us some more answers, because it gives us a greater awareness of what has been perceived, or what we perceive is perceived through a higher level of awareness, which can help us to know ourselves, or the self. The self, a self, as in a mind with an infinite number of personalities, a self expressing an infinite number of selves from that self. Okay. So, like I said, I will ponder on that one with a higher level of awareness, so that our perception of what we are might be improved. That's my goal, to understand us, the way everything works, how to utilise our potential instead of being like a $1 million racing car driving around in first gear. We use a very minimal amount of our potential, but there's a whole lot there. We just haven't perceived it very well. The way we see it is very limited. We need to improve upon that. Hopefully we can. But it takes devotion. We need to really focus our mind on what's important and not be so sidetracked with all the diversions of what's not important, but we have regarded as important. So we get embedded into the web of possibilities based upon our level of awareness and intelligence. But we get trapped in our own ignorance, our lack of understanding, our lack of information, our lack of awareness. We get bogged down in that lack. So, like I said, we don't see the $1 million racing car for what it is. We see this basic, very basic description or reflection of that. Very basic reflection of what is possible. But we're learning. We are learning. And if I didn't think we were going to get there, I wouldn't have wasted my time researching all of this stuff, looking into myself, inside, to figure out what was there, what I am made up of, what the dream is made up of, what the mind is made up of, what our potential is, and how we can express that potential in a more responsible way, rather than simply willy-nilly manifesting our thoughts unintentionally and then blaming someone else for them if they aren't real great. It's your fault. Must be you, wasn't me. Okay, so as I said before, and we'll keep on saying, I hope somebody got something from this. And if you want to know more, you can revert to my website, alchemir.com, alchemir.com. Alchemir being a acronym for Advanced Life Kinetics and Memory Intuited Regenerative Research. Regenerative, to recreate something, to create it again. Memory intuited, to remember something, to remember how we came about. Advanced life kinetics, the forces that act upon motion, consciousness, how we evolve our consciousness, the forces that trigger off that evolution, the advancement, advanced life kinetics. Thank you. And we'll catch up. Okay. So I pondered a little bit on that product of insight. Now, I'll explain what's going on here. See, insight is looking within. That's what insight is. Looking within. Now, it's a product of perception and imagination, or creative thought. Perception of what has been created. Perception of creativity. Looking within at what is a creation. Looking within a creation is insight. Something that has been created. That's what insight is. Looking within something that has been created to understand its purpose, its function. Insight. Now, as I've said before, there is one mind with an infinite number of personalities or identified attitudinal behaviours. Speaking of us, an infinite number of identified attitudinal behaviours. Our innate ability, well, first of all, we are an essence that thinks. Our innate ability is to visualise our thoughts into a dream state. We exist as personalities of the mind within a shared dream. We share a mind. We are personalities of the same mind. Therefore, we share a dream. A shared dream with an infinite number of personal realities within the one dream. A shared dream. Shared dream. Now, let's relate that to insight. If we were going to look within, perfect solution. Now, getting away from the normal stuff that we would have related that to, we visualise our thoughts into a shared dream. So looking within if we look at the dream itself, it will help us to understand, because it's a visualization of our thoughts, it'll help us to understand our own mind. Because this is a visualization of our thoughts, we have embedded ourselves within our own dream state to experience our own thoughts, looking within, experiencing our own thoughts, interacting with the manifestations of those thoughts, gaining experience from that interaction, learning to understand ourselves, know thyself, learning to understand the self, looking within. The perfect way is to look at the visualization of our own thoughts to understand what's within the mind. So we have that 21-pointed polygon, represents insight, a product of perception, but creative perception, or perception of creativity, how we perceive what is being created. Looking within, this is what we have created. This is our creation, our dream, the visualization of our thoughts. That's what the dream is, the visualization of our thoughts. Okay, so to produce feeling from that structure, as we said, we need to double that to make 42 points. So it's a product, it's an even number. You can't produce feeling from odd-numbered polygons as the equator or the emotional plane. It has to be even-numbered polygons. Okay, so we create the 42-point design. That becomes 7 hexagons or center point hexagons, 6 heptagons of perception. Center point hexagon is awareness, perceptive awareness, perceptive awareness. Now, okay. Now, as we said, perception, hindsight, looking back, insight, looking within, foresight, looking ahead. It's how we perceive what we're looking at. What we get from, it's a form of understanding determined by what we get from what we're looking at. Now, quite often, when we look at something, we're focusing on what we're looking at, and we're overlooking almost everything else by looking at some particular thing. We simply are not aware of what everything else is going on around because we're looking at a particular thing in a particular direction, focusing our thoughts on something, overlooking everything else. But peripheral vision is when we can look at something and see everything else around us. Well, up to a certain point. Obviously, we can't see it in the back of our head, but we can see a pretty wide 180 degree, at least 180 degrees, peripheral vision. So when we're looking, we're aware of a whole lot more than what we're just looking at. Perceptive awareness, that 42 point, 7 times the hexagon. Hexagon of love, unconditional acceptance, awareness, sensory impulse, Visualization. Sense visualizes thoughts. Awareness is a sense. It's a sense agreement. So it's an agreement, a visualized agreement, or an agreement of what has been visualized. We visualize unconditionally. It's an unconditional visualization. An agreement of unconditional visualization. Awareness. Perceptive awareness. Peripheral awareness. That's what I have from my pondering, which wasn't that long actually. So I decided to add it to this video. Okay, peripheral awareness. We are aware of what's going on around us, even though we're looking in a particular direction or looking at something. Peripheral awareness. Now we can create a feeling from that particular design of thought. An expression of emotional intelligence, or an expression of what has been suggestively taken on board and built upon through peripheral awareness. An expression of what has been suggestively taken on board and built upon through peripheral awareness. Peripheral awareness-based feeling. Feeling suggests behavior, so it's peripheral awareness-based behavior. Peripheral awareness-based behavior. Okay. What would we call that? Peripheral awareness-based behavior. Aware of a lot more than what we're just looking at. We look at the dream. We look within the dream. We're looking at our own thoughts being visualized into that dream state. We have immersed ourselves within our own reality based upon our own thoughts, our own virtual reality that we're interacting with. Interaction allows an entity to influence and be influenced by an environment. So by interacting with this virtual reality, we have the potential to influence that reality and be influenced by that reality, dependent upon our understanding of that reality. If we have accepted that this reality is our own creation, it's more likely that we'll have influence over that reality. If we haven't accepted this reality as our own creation, and it was created by something else, we may be more influenced by the virtual reality rather than influencing that virtual reality. So, more chance of us being governed by our own dream, embedded into it, not understanding what it really is and how it was created, but being governed by our own dream state, a visualization of our own thoughts. And if our thoughts, if we have limited understanding, limited awareness, then we haven't got a clue. Self-perpetuating dream. We run around like chooks with their heads cut off because we haven't got a clue. We're making stuff up. We're making stuff up, trying to fill in the blanks, trying to give us some level of security within our own dream state to help us feel more comfortable with it. So we've made a whole lot of stuff up. Oh, this is how it might be. Oh, yes, we could have done that. Oh, that's how it could have been. This is how it might work. Take it all on board through our belief systems. Yeah, this is how it all works. Then we become governed by our beliefs. Every methodology we create, we become governed by that methodology. Oh, yeah, this is all these steps need to take place before this can happen and that can happen. Methodology, we become governed by that. Then we have to take all those steps to make that happen. If you miss a step, got to go back to the start. Okay, a whole lot of stuff going on here. Like I said, how we perceive ourselves, how we perceive the dream, how we perceive our experiences is determined by our level of awareness of what's going on. If we're just looking at one thing, tunnel vision, focused on one thing, blocking out everything else, tunnel vision. Peripheral vision, looking at something and still seeing everything else, the big picture. Okay, so we have that peripheral awareness-based feeling, peripheral awareness-based behaviour. Then we can have a logic state, an emotional logic, polarised by that same thing, peripheral awareness. Peripheral awareness polarised, emotional intellect agreement. Peripheral awareness polarised emotional logic. Now it's a product of insight, looking within. But as we said, looking within, for us, in truth, we are existing within our own dream state. This is a visualization of our own mind. So in essence, by experiencing this dream state, we are looking within, gaining an understanding of what has been created, an understanding of creation, looking within our own mind, how we perceive what's going on. Perception, how we see something, form of understanding, looking, seeing, hindsight, insight, foresight, and peripheral vision. Okay, like I said, I wanted to add that bit because it's important. Very important. We exist within our own mind. We're looking at our own thoughts manifesting themselves into a dream state that we're all embedded within, a shared dream. Through that peripheral awareness, we get a greater understanding of the big picture. Greater understanding of the big picture. That's going to determine how we behave within our own mind, within the dream that we exist within. Shared dream of all the other identified attitudinal behaviours of our potential. Potential behaviours. Pure potential is an infinite source of possible thoughts. Pure potential. Nothing in particular, but the source from which everything comes. Unpurposed energy. Thought is energy. Pure potential is the potential to think. From that potential to think comes the results of thinking, which are thoughts, designs of thought. So we have thought in essence, and then designs of thought, intentions, agendas, I love this stuff. I really love this stuff. Okay, it gives us something to think about. As I said, if you want to know more, check out my website. I will share everything that I have learned, because we're all living in the same dream. We're all part of the same mind. Everything that happens within the dream is going to affect me and you. So we may as well be all supporting one another, sharing what we understand with one another, so we can have a better time within the dream, a better experience within our own mind, within our own imagination, because that's where we exist, within our own imagination. Creative thought, imagination. Okay, guys, thank you again, and I'll add to that information as I get it. Thanking you.